Welcome to E Squared Emporium for all things AP Psychology. This is Methods Part 2. We're going to look at different types of research methods. So when you see the word methodology, a lot of students panic and stop in their tracks and it gets confusing. But methodology is really just methods. It's really just asking you what method is being used. Is this an experiment? Is this a case study? That's it. That's all it's asking. So we're going to look at a whole lot of different basic research methods, case studies, correlational studies, experimental studies. That's what we're going to be studying here. So is it a case study? Is it an experiment? Is it a correlation? Is it a survey? Is it a naturalistic observation? And you're going to know the difference by the time we're done. The case study is an opportunity to investigate a phenomenon or a situation that we could not otherwise study. It would be very unethical to create the situation that we then observe as a case study. So we are not manipulating anything. There is no X and Y variable at all happening in a case study. It is a situation that is rare and unique. It is something that is occurring out in the world that we can then examine that condition, but we could never create that condition. And it gives us insight into unique behavior. It's actually the oldest method. We can trace this all the way back to the Egyptians and the Greeks and the Romans, this idea of studying one individual or one small group of people. So examples, we're looking at Clive Waring in class. He has a very rare case of amnesia. It would be unethical to recreate amnesia in a person, but since he already has it, we could then study it. So some of the pros and cons with a case study. It is great for going in depth in a subject. We call that rich data. It is also very slow. It will take you a very long time. Now you could combine blood work and say brain scans, but also interviews with that particular person. So it could be a lot of different resources that you use, and it could take you years of your life to do a full case study. We're going to look at Phineas Gage when we get to the brain chapter. That's a very famous case study. The blue Fugits are a family that are actually blue. They are in Troublesome Creek, Kentucky, and they have a rare genetic mutation that makes their skin appear blue. And you can study all about them and read all about them. But that would be an interesting case study. People who have dissociative identity disorder, what we used to call multiple personality disorder, cases like Sybil, that was a case study. Going to look at a stroke victim and how they are now healing or recovering. Looking into some tragic cases of child abuse. We're going to look at Jeannie, who was a young girl who didn't get to speak until much later in her teenage years. She was pre-verbal because of abuse that she had endured. So we're going to be looking at her later in the language section. These are all case studies. So it's something that has happened to a particular person or a group of people that we could not ethically recreate. Then we move on to observational, natural observation, the observational approach. So up in the corner is Jane Goodall, one of the most famous women for researching chimps and apes. And it's the same basic data collection method as what we use for studying animals. Only for humans, we might not be out in nature. You might be at the food court at the mall. You might be in your school cafeteria. You might be observing on the bus. We might be observing in a school, in a hospital, in a corporate boardroom situation. A natural observation is describing behavior. We are not establishing a cause and effect relationship. We may be looking at, for instance, pro-social behavior. We may be looking at human mating behavior and flirting. We may be looking at signs of aggression in a football game. So we're just observing and recording behavior in the natural environment. We don't control anything. We can't manipulate anything. We are not supposed to get involved either. It's a little difficult if you see somebody in an abusive situation or if you see a fight about to start. We're really not supposed to interfere with that. We're really not supposed to step in if you're there for a natural observation. Of course, there are times ethically and legally where we need to, and that's a fine line that we'll discuss later on. So what are we looking for? We're looking to target a specific behavior, and we're going to practice this in class. So you're not just watching everything, you're targeting a behavior. You're targeting, do children in kindergarten share their toys? And that's the behavior that you're targeting. You're targeting, do teenagers in the cafeteria share their tater tots, right? And you're targeting a very specific behavior. Then we move on to surveys, and we've all been a part of surveys. This one's pretty easy, right? It's on FaceTube and Snapchat and email and phone. And in the olden days, it'd come in the mail. So you can collect a lot of information really quickly and really cheaply from a very large group of people. You could stand at the mall with a clipboard. You can ask face to face, and you ask them questions, or you hand them the clipboard and you ask them to fill it out. So it could be self-reporting. So quick, easy, it can be anonymous. It does depend on where you're standing, though, by the way, right? So if you're standing outside Sports Authority, you're going to get a very different group of people answering than if you're outside of, I don't know, H&M, or Abercrombie and Fitch. You're going to get a different group of people signing that survey. So surveys often use questions that have closed questions like yes or no. Think about that. Why do we want a short yes or no? Right? Well, it's faster, right? It's faster to collect data. So if we were to ask an open-ended question, it would take a very long time. So think about, would you want, if you're at the mall and you're shopping with your friends or your family, and somebody comes up to you and says, hey, would you mind signing this really quick survey? It's 5 yes or no questions. Or if they say to you, I've got 45 minutes of basically essay questions, and you're going to have to really think hard about it and tell me your entire life story and, tell me the most personal, vulnerable things about yourself. You are not going to take that survey, right? So it's easier to gather data and compare data and easier to get quick statistical analysis. The interview is a much longer process. Interviews are typically one-on-one. We don't want to have multiple people in the interview because it could sway their answers, right? If you did a college interview with 7 people in the room, how are you not going to have your answer sound like somebody else's answer? Or you're going to be like, oh, darn it, that was what I was going to say. So that's why it's typically one-on-one so that you can't sway other people's answers and they can't sway yours. It's typically question and answer format. Here, the questions will be longer. The format will be more than yes and no. It takes a very long time to gather data. But you can get a lot of rich data in interviews. But, if you're an undergraduate in college, it could take you the entire year to do an interview project. A structured interview means that you have the same exact consistent questions that you ask every single person. Unstructured means that maybe you ask different questions to different people depending on how the interview is going or what direction it's taking. But structured interview is just what it sounds like, very structured. Everyone gets the same sequence. Again, usually longer and more subjective answers. How do you judge that answer to be emotional or, to be serious or scientific? It's much more difficult. Cross-sectional studies are studies that we do across the entire population. So you see the word cross and you see across, that's how you're going to remember it. It's across the population. We are analyzing different ages or different groups at one specific point in time, not over a long period of time. And we want a balance of gender or race or age or whatever the group is, however we're leveling people out. We want to get a nice cross section of all of those people. Okay? So here's an example. If you were going to say ask at your school, and let's say your school was K through 12, you would want a certain number of preschoolers, a certain number of elementary, a certain number of middle school, a certain number of high school. You would want a certain number of adults and maybe recently retired people. That would be a cross section. You would get everybody's opinion, not just one group. You can't just go ask, all the juniors. You would get a nice cross section. If we were to go into Winston-Salem, we could ask the same kind of cross section across a major city like Winston-Salem. Now, this is the opposite. A longitudinal study, we're taking one small group of people. It's the same group of people, and we're observing them over a long period of time. So see the word long is in longitudinal, right? That's going to help you remember that. Sometimes these studies are so long that the researcher may have to give his research to his undergrad student to continue. So you may have a college professor say, here's my study in people who live to be 100, but right now they're only 80, and I'm giving you all of my research, and you're going to keep watching them as they turn 90 and turn 100, and then you're going to pass it on to somebody. All right, so it takes a very long time. It's a repeated look at the same group of people. We're looking at social and developmental psych mostly here, and we're studying their life events. Could even be generational, right? You could look at grandparents and then the parents and then the children who maybe ate more seafood, right? A lot of people do this for diet and longevity or certain vitamins, magnesium or copper or something going on in the water. So it could be generational. So, some examples of what we do for longitudinal studies. We study the blue zones. There's a great series on Netflix about the blue zones and longevity. These are people who live to be 100 in very specific zones around the planet. You might start with people, young ladies who had teen pregnancy, and so you're following them after high school. What do their 20s look like? What do their 30s look like? What do their 40s look like? And maybe comparing them to other people of the similar age who were not, in that particular study. People who grew up in poverty, kids who lost their guardians in the 9/11 attacks, children who were arrested as teenagers. What's their life like when they're 20, 30, 40, 50, 60? So you follow their life for a very long time, that same group of people. And again, often a second researcher may have to take over your work. So we're going to talk for a whole day about correlations, so I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about it here. Correlations do not equal causation, and we'll really understand that when we get there. So we're looking at two factors, an X and a Y. How do these two factors, how are they correlated? What is the relationship? And is there a link? Like when we study depression and seasonal affective disorder, which we call SAD, are more people depressed in the winter when we have extra hours of darkness? Or are more people depressed in countries that have extra hours of darkness? And would we see a correlation between that X and that Y? Now, again, we're not manipulating anything, we're not changing anything. We're really just observing two things that have happened. And we're going to spend a whole day and a whole lot of this year on lab experiments, which we also call controlled experiments or a controlled lab experiment. You see here in the pictures, there's a one-way mirror where they can't see you, but you can observe them. So there could be a whole room of researchers watching the observation. You could have children come into the room and play with toys. You could have interviews happening in the room. So sometimes we use cameras. You can use cameras as well. So the research is designed to manipulate factors. This is the only one that determines cause and effect. We like to have it in a lab because then we can control all variables. We can control the lighting. It doesn't matter what time of day it is with the lighting in there. We can control the temperature. Is it too hot or too cold? We can control the noise volume. So it's nice to do it in a lab. They're not always in a lab. So there's a strict control of variables. You're only changing one variable at a time. There's an independent and a dependent variable. We'll spend a whole day on that. It is easy to replicate once you've got a good lab experiment. You just write down the details and anyone else can pick it up and replicate it. It is the only one that gives us valid cause and effect. You could have technology available, which some of the others are difficult. But here it could be a laptop, it could be an iPad, very easy to use technology. But just like this young lady here who's got this strange machine strapped to her head, it may have what we call artificial validity or ecological validity. So maybe you don't feel very comfortable, right? They strap you up to a machine, you're on all these electrodes, and they say, just act natural. But you know you're being observed and you know you're being watched and you're strapped to a machine. So, how natural is it? So, that's one of the downfalls of this type of experiment. And there is more than one way that we can look at a particular situation. So often we'll bring in all of them to have a complete picture. We'll do a correlation, and then the correlation requires a hypothesis and an actual study. Maybe we go out to the lab, maybe we do field, maybe we do observation, maybe we do a survey. So we might bring all of the details in together. All right, and that is the end of part 2. It was a little long, but we're getting there. We're getting a little faster here. So make sure that you go ahead and watch part 3 next.